The desert dawn painted the Arizona landscape in hues of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain as Ethan Reeves completed his morning 5-mile run. At 42, his 6'2" frame remained as disciplined as during his Delta Force days. Lean, muscular, purposeful. Sweat glistened on his weathered face as he slowed to a walk, his vigilant hazel eyes automatically scanning the horizon with practiced precision. 16 years in special operations had permanently altered how he viewed the world. The small security consulting office he maintained on the outskirts of Cactus Ridge sat just 12 miles from the Mexican border. The hand-painted sign reading Reeves Security Solutions was the only indication of business in the converted ranch house. He preferred it that way, unassuming, just another dusty building on a forgotten stretch of highway. Inside, Ethan moved with quiet efficiency, brewing coffee strong enough to strip paint, while methodically checking the 3 monitors displaying feeds from discreetly placed cameras around his property. Nothing. Just desert scrub and the occasional jackrabbit. He'd installed the system himself, using military-grade equipment that former teammates occasionally liberated from surplus. Old habits died hard. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Miguel Sanchez, a Border Patrol agent he befriended 2 years ago during a joint task force operation. "Ethan, you still consulting for that mining company near Nogales?" Miguel's voice carried the weight of concern. "Wrapped that up last month." "Why?" Ethan leaned against his desk, already sensing this wasn't a social call. "Got something unusual. Convoy patterns changing. New routes opening up along the eastern corridor. Way off the established paths." Ethan's interest peaked. Desperation or strategy? That's what has me worried. Doesn't feel desperate. Feels. Miguel paused, searching for the word. Coordinated. Professional. After hanging up, Ethan unlocked the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. Inside lay an encrypted laptop, 3 passports under different names, and a worn leather journal. The journal contained handwritten notes from every operation he'd led in mountainous and desert terrain, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen. Tactics that wouldn't be found in any military manual. Techniques developed by men who learned to turn hostile environments into weapons. The rhythmic tapping of his fingers against the leather cover matched the cadence of his thoughts. If cartel operations were expanding into the eastern corridor, they'd be moving through terrain he knew intimately. Terrain that had once been the classroom where he learned the art of desert warfare. He still remembered the words of his first Delta Force commander: "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. It amplifies them." That lesson had saved his life more times than he could count. 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq had taught Ethan to read the desert like others read books. He knew how to spot disturbed earth from a mile away, how to track vehicles by the subtle compression patterns in sand, how to predict movement based on terrain features invisible to untrained eyes. The cartels had money, weapons, and manpower, but they didn't have his training. The collection of medals and commendations remained locked in a fireproof safe, alongside his service photos. He rarely looked at them. The faces of his former teammates, some now dead, stirred memories he preferred to keep contained. But the skills, the instincts they'd honed together, those he carried with him every day. His transition to civilian life had been smoother than most. The security consulting business provided steady income and a purpose that didn't stray far from his training. Local ranchers hired him to assess property vulnerabilities. Mining companies contracted his services for convoy security. Law enforcement agencies occasionally brought him in as a consultant on tactical operations. It kept his skills sharp while maintaining the quiet life he'd carved out for himself. Ethan poured a second cup of coffee and stepped onto the back porch. His property extended 2 acres into the desert, ending at a natural rise that provided a clear vantage point in all directions. The isolation suited him. Out here, the constant hypervigilance that had followed him from combat felt less like a burden and more like an appropriate response to his environment. His Native American heritage, a quarter Tejano Awadam on his mother's side, had deepened his connection to this land. His grandfather had taught him to respect the desert long before the military had taught him to exploit it tactically. The desert reveals truth, his grandfather would say. It strips away everything unnecessary. The distant sound of an approaching vehicle drew his attention. A dust cloud rose on the horizon, following the dirt road that led to his property. Few people came here unannounced. Ethan's right hand instinctively moved toward the small of his back, where his Glock 19 rested in a concealed holster. A constant companion since his discharge. The vehicle, a white Border Patrol SUV, came into view. Miguel. Ethan relaxed slightly, but watched with professional interest as his friend navigated the approach. Even now, he cataloged details automatically. Miguel drove with one hand, the other likely holding a phone. The vehicle slowed at the cattle guard, suggesting he was talking to someone important enough to warrant his full attention. "Brought you something," Miguel called out, emerging from the vehicle with a thick folder. His Border Patrol uniform showed the dust of a long shift, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of too many consecutive nights on duty. Inside, Miguel spread satellite images across Ethan's kitchen table. These were taken over the past 6 weeks. Notice anything? Ethan studied them methodically, his trained eye picking up what others would miss. New tracks where there should be none. Disturbed earth in distinct patterns. Staging areas being established in remote canyons. They're setting up a major corridor, Ethan concluded, arranging the photos in sequence. Testing routes, establishing caches, conducting reconnaissance. He pointed to a particular canyon. This formation here, it's perfect for moving product. Natural concealment, limited approach vectors, excellent defensive position if compromised. Miguel nodded grimly. Exactly what I thought. Problem is, we don't have the manpower to monitor it. Budget cuts hit us hard last quarter. Who's running this operation? This isn't standard cartel procedure. That's where it gets interesting. Miguel pulled out another photo. Facial recognition picked this up at a gas station near the new routes. The image showed a man in his late 30s, unremarkable except for the calculating intelligence in his eyes. Ethan recognized the type immediately. Military-trained, disciplined, dangerous. Not your typical cartel muscle. Victor Salazar, Miguel explained. Former Mexican Special Forces. Went private 8 years ago. Started as security for the Sinaloa cartel, rose through ranks. Now he runs their border operations. Brings military precision to everything. Our analysts say he's revolutionizing their smuggling methodology. The name triggered a memory. Salazar. Was he involved in that ambush near Sonora 3 years ago? The one that took out an entire Federals unit. Miguel's expression confirmed it. 15 dead. No survivors. No arrests. Ethan studied the photo more carefully. Here was a true adversary. Someone who understood tactical operations. Someone who could turn the desert into a weapon just as he could. The thought stirred something inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, exactly. More like recognition. I need to make some calls, Ethan said, already mentally assembling a team. Former colleagues who settled nearby. People I trust. This isn't officially sanctioned, Ethan. I'm sharing intelligence, that's all. Border Patrol can't authorize civilian intervention. Ethan offered a thin smile. Just consulting work, Miguel. Environmental assessment. Terrain evaluation. All above board. They both understood the fiction. Plausible deniability protected them both. After Miguel left, Ethan called former Staff Sergeant James "Doc" Willard, who had served as the team medic during Ethan's last 2 deployments. Doc had settled just an hour away in Tucson, working as a paramedic while battling his own demons with varying success. "Need your eyes on something," Ethan said when Doc answered. The familiar shorthand of their service days required no elaboration. Location? Doc's voice carried no hesitation, just the immediate focus that had made him invaluable in the field. My place. Tomorrow. 0600. Copy that. Still take your coffee black and bitter as regret. Ethan laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. Some things never change. The next call went to Marina Kovacs, former Army intelligence with a genius for communication systems and electronic warfare. She'd served as tactical support for several of Ethan's operations in Afghanistan, though they'd rarely met in person during those deployments. Now she worked remotely for a cybersecurity firm while living off-grid in a converted shipping container 50 miles east. "Reeves," she answered, recognition in her voice. "Been a minute. Got a situation developing. Could use your skill set." A pause, then, "Sanctioned or freelance?" "Consulting work. Border security assessment." Marina chuckled. "Right. I'll bring the equipment. Anything specific?" "Long-range observation. Signals intelligence. The usual." "Consider it done." The final call went to Carlos Mendez, a former ranger who'd specialized in desert reconnaissance and survival. His family had ranched in the region for generations, giving him an intimate knowledge of the borderlands that even Ethan couldn't match. "Ethan," Carlos greeted him warmly. "Tell me you need help with more than fixing that irrigation system I installed last year. Got something more interesting. Potential security threat along the eastern corridor. Need your expertise." "Cartel activity?" "Affirmative. New patterns, professional leadership." Carlos didn't hesitate. "I'm in. My cousin's wedding is this weekend, but I can be there Monday morning." "Perfect. Bring your long-duration gear. Might need extended surveillance." By evening, Ethan had assembled the core of a team he would trust with his life, because he had, many times before. The familiar process of operational planning settled over him like a well-worn glove. He spread maps across his dining table, marking terrain features, potential observation posts, infiltration routes. The desert was his ally in this, its harsh conditions a filter that would separate the prepared from the vulnerable. As darkness fell, Ethan stepped outside again. The desert night was alive with sounds invisible visitors never noticed. The subtle rustle of nocturnal predators, the whisper of wind through cactus spines, the distant yip of coyotes hunting in packs. He listened with practiced attention, cataloging each sound, creating a baseline of normal against which anomalies would stand out. The stars emerged in brilliant clarity, unmarred by city lights. Out here, the Milky Way spread across the sky like spilled silver. During his deployments, he'd often found the desert night sky a strange comfort. The same stars shone over Afghanistan as over Arizona. The same darkness concealed both friend and enemy. The same silence could mean safety or imminent danger. Ethan's sat phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Marina. "Equipment prepped. ETA 0630 tomorrow. Bringing thermal plus SIGINT package." He acknowledged with a brief reply, then continued his evening ritual. The property perimeter check took exactly 22 minutes, a habit formed during countless security rotations in combat zones. He moved silently despite the darkness, his footsteps instinctively avoiding loose rocks and dry brush that might create noise. Back inside, he reviewed the dossier Miguel had provided on Victor Salazar. The man's military record was impressive: specialized training in unconventional warfare, combat experience against cartel operations before ironically joining their ranks, commendations for tactical innovation. A formidable opponent. Ethan recognized the pattern. He'd seen it before with former military who crossed to the other side. The skills remained sharp, but the moral compass deteriorated. Rules of engagement became flexible, then non-existent. The tactical expertise that had once protected the innocent was redirected toward exploitation and profit. It troubled him more than he cared to admit. There but for the grace of God, as the saying went. He'd had his own dark periods after discharge. Months of aimless anger, nightmares that left him gasping and reaching for weapons that weren't there, a profound disconnection from civilian life that made even simple interactions feel like navigating a minefield without a detector. What had saved him? Not what, but who. A chance encounter with Samuel Running Bear, a Tejano Awadam elder and Vietnam veteran who recognized the signs of a warrior adrift. The old man had simply shown up at Ethan's rental house one day, bearing fry bread and saying, "Time for you to remember who you were before they taught you to kill." Under Samuel's patient guidance, Ethan had reconnected with his heritage, learning traditional skills his grandfather had begun teaching him before deployment schedules interrupted. How to read weather patterns and cloud formations. How to find water in seemingly barren landscapes. How to move with the desert rather than against it. Samuel had passed away last winter, his lined face peaceful in death as it rarely had been in life. At the funeral, he'd been honored as both a tribal elder and a decorated veteran. Ethan had stood among the mourners, understanding that he straddled the same worlds: military discipline and ancestral wisdom, modern tactical knowledge, and ancient desert craft. Now, facing an emerging threat led by someone like Salazar, Ethan would need to draw on both traditions. His military training would identify vulnerabilities in the cartel's operations. His Tohono O'odham heritage would help him leverage the desert itself as an ally. Sleep came fitfully that night, his mind cycling through contingencies, terrain analyses, resource allocations. Old mission planning habits resurfacing with surprising clarity. By dawn, he was already awake, reviewing satellite imagery with fresh eyes. The eastern corridor Salazar was developing ran through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the region, a labyrinth of dry washes, narrow canyons, and exposed ridgelines. Difficult to traverse without specific knowledge. Nearly impossible to secure completely. A perfect killing ground if one knew how to use it. Ethan pushed that thought away. This wasn't about killing. This was about intelligence gathering, threat assessment, and, if necessary, disruption of cartel operations through non-lethal means. At least, that's what he told himself as he cleaned his personal weapons with practiced efficiency: the Glock 19, a Remington 700 bolt-action rifle, and a Benchmade tactical knife that had accompanied him through 3 combat deployments. Just precautions. Just tools of the trade. The rising sun found him on the observation ridge behind his property, binoculars sweeping the approach road, watching for his team's arrival. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, not the crushing burden it had been in combat, when lives literally depended on his decisions, but an echo of that pressure. These were his people, responding to his call. Their safety was now his concern. Doc arrived first, his battered Jeep raising dust plumes visible from miles away. He emerged looking much as he had in their service days, stocky and strong, with calloused hands and watchful eyes. The medical kit he carried was civilian in appearance, but military in capability, a compromise between his paramedic work and his combat experience. "Still living like a hermit, I see," Doc commented, surveying the isolated property. "Still driving that rolling tetanus risk, I see," Ethan countered, nodding toward the Jeep. They clasped hands in the abbreviated hug of men who had shared too much to require demonstrations of their bond. Marina arrived 30 minutes later in a meticulously maintained Land Cruiser loaded with equipment cases. Her short-cropped hair was new, as was the sleeve of tattoos extending down her right arm, but her sharp gaze and efficient movements remained unchanged. "Brought the toys," she announced, patting a hard-sided case. "Including some prototypes my company is developing. Consider this a field test." Inside, Ethan prepared breakfast, a habit from deployment days when team briefings often happened over meals. As they ate, he outlined what they knew about Salazar's operation, the unusual pattern of activity, and the terrain challenges. "So we're looking at a military-trained cartel lieutenant establishing new smuggling routes through some of the nastiest terrain on the border," Doc summarized, spreading jam on his third piece of toast. "And we're what? Just going to observe?" "For now," Ethan confirmed. "Border Patrol doesn't have the resources to monitor these areas continuously. We gather intelligence, document activity, establish patterns. Hand off actionable intelligence to the authorities." Marina raised an eyebrow. "And if we witness active smuggling operations? Violent crimes in progress?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Then we contact law enforcement immediately. We're observers, not vigilantes." The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. They all knew how remote these areas were, how response times could be measured in hours rather than minutes. They all understood that situations could deteriorate faster than help could arrive. Carlos joins us Monday, Ethan continued. Until then, we establish observation posts, test communications equipment, and conduct preliminary reconnaissance. No contact, no engagement. Clear. Doc and Marina nodded, the familiar rhythm of operational planning bringing a focused energy to the room. For all their civilian trappings, they remained warriors at heart, people who functioned best with clear objectives and defined parameters. As they finalized equipment checks and communication protocols, Ethan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since his discharge. This wasn't combat deployment with its adrenaline-fueled intensity, but neither was it the often mundane routine of his consulting work. This was something in between, using his skills to protect others, leveraging his training against a legitimate threat, working with a team he trusted implicitly. The desert stretched beyond his windows, ancient and indifferent to human concerns. It had witnessed countless conflicts before this one. Territorial disputes between indigenous tribes, Spanish conquistadors seeking gold, American settlers pushing westward, and now cartels establishing smuggling routes for drugs and humans. Throughout it all, the desert remained a constant, beautiful, deadly, and unforgiving of mistakes. Just like the combat zones where Ethan had learned his trade. Just like the heritage lands where his ancestors had survived for generations before him. By midday, they were loaded and ready to move out for their first reconnaissance patrol. Ethan performed a final check of his equipment, water, communications, weapons, medical supplies. The familiar weight of his tactical vest centered him, the muscle memory of countless similar preparations guiding his hands. Just like old times, Doc commented, adjusting his own gear. Not quite, Ethan replied. This time we're fighting on home ground. Dawn broke over the eastern ridge as Ethan, Doc, and Marina established their first observation post. They'd chosen an elevated position overlooking a narrow canyon, one of several potential choke points identified in the satellite imagery. The natural rock formation provided both concealment and a commanding view of the approaches from the south. Marina unpacked her equipment with practiced efficiency, setting up a portable solar array to power the surveillance system. Range on these new thermal imagers is about 3 kilometers in optimal conditions, she explained, calibrating the device. Resolution good enough to distinguish between human and animal movement. What about vehicles? Ethan asked, scanning the terrain through his binoculars. Engine heat signatures are unmistakable. We'll see them coming from twice that distance. Doc finished setting up their communications relay, a discrete antenna disguised as weathered desert scrub. Encrypted channel is live. Signal bouncing through 3 civilian satellites before reaching our secure server. Untraceable, even with military-grade equipment. They settled into the familiar rhythm of surveillance, methodical, patient, thorough. Every half hour, they documented any changes in the terrain below, no matter how insignificant. A displaced rock. A disturbed patch of earth. The subtle signs that might indicate human passage. By mid-afternoon, the unrelenting sun had turned their position into an oven. Despite the heat, they maintained their vigilance, rotating observation duties to ensure fresh eyes on the target zone. Years of desert deployments had taught them all how to function in extreme conditions. Movement, Marina announced at 1,542 hours, her voice instantly shifting to the clipped professional tone of their service days. Single vehicle approaching from the southwest. Civilian pickup, heavily loaded based on suspension compression. Ethan moved to the spotting scope, adjusting the focus. Mexican plates. 2 occupants in the cab. Can't see the bed contents. The pickup moved slowly along the canyon floor, stopping occasionally as the passenger exited to examine the terrain. Even from this distance, Ethan recognized the deliberate movement patterns of someone conducting a route survey. They're scouting, he confirmed. Cataloging terrain features, identifying potential hazards or choke points. Doc photographed the activity with a long-range camera equipped with a military-grade telephoto lens. Professional methodology. Not your typical drug mules. For 2 hours, They observed as the vehicle methodically traversed the canyon, the passenger marking waypoints on what appeared to be a handheld GPS device. The precision of the operation confirmed what Miguel had indicated. This was no ordinary smuggling preparation, but something more organized, more tactical in nature. As dusk approached, the pickup departed, heading back toward the border. Ethan documented the exact route in his notebook, adding it to the growing map of cartel movements they were assembling. We should relocate before dawn, he decided. Establish a new observation post further east. Track their next move. They maintained surveillance through the night, taking shifts to ensure continuous monitoring while allowing for necessary rest. The desert darkness brought a profound silence interrupted only by the occasional call of nocturnal predators. No further vehicle activity materialized, but twice they detected heat signatures consistent with foot patrols, single individuals moving with careful precision along ridgelines, likely cartel scouts establishing overwatch positions. Morning brought the arrival of Carlos Mendez, his approach so stealthy that even Ethan's trained ear barely detected it until he was within 50 meters of their position. Carlos moved through the desert landscape with the ease of someone born to it, his ranger training enhanced by generations of family knowledge. 3 more observation teams set up along the eastern corridor, Carlos reported after exchanging brief greetings. Local ranchers reporting increased activity, unfamiliar vehicles, disturbed fence lines, footprints where there shouldn't be any. He unfolded a topographical map, pointing to several marked locations. My cousin's property backs up to this ridge system. Last week he found this. Carlos produced a small plastic bag containing a miniature electronic device. Radio repeater. Military grade. Someone's setting up a communications network through these canyons. Marina examined the device with professional interest. Russian manufacture, but modified. Extended battery life, boosted signal range. Sophisticated stuff for cartel operations. Not for regular shipments, Ethan concluded. This level of preparation suggests something bigger. Specialized cargo, high value. They spent the morning consolidating their intelligence, Marina's electronic surveillance data, Doc's photographic documentation, Carlos's ground reconnaissance findings, and Ethan's tactical analysis. A pattern emerged, systematic preparation of a new smuggling corridor with multiple redundant routes, communications infrastructure, and advanced scout positions. This isn't just about moving product, Ethan realized, studying the composite map they'd created. They're establishing a permanent presence. Territory expansion. The implications were disturbing. Cartel territory meant cartel violence, intimidation of local residents, potential firefights with rival organizations, corruption of local officials. The violence that had plagued Mexican border communities for decades creeping further north into American soil. At 1,300 hours, their observation post detected 2 more vehicles entering the canyon system, both SUVs with darkened windows, moving with cautious precision through the terrain. Unlike the previous pickup, these vehicles traveled in tactical formation, maintaining consistent distance, alternating lead positions at potential ambush points. Military driving tactics, Doc noted, his expression grim. Whoever these guys are, they've had professional training. Through the telephoto lens, they captured images of the occupants, 6 men total, armed with what appeared to be AR-15 variants and tactical gear including body armor and radio equipment. They moved with the disciplined coordination that Ethan recognized immediately from his own training. These weren't street thugs or common criminals, but professionally trained operators. We need to get closer, Ethan decided. Visual confirmation only gets us so far. Carlos nodded in agreement. There's a drainage wash that runs parallel to their path. Provides cover all the way to that rock formation. He indicated a position approximately 1 kilometer away from the vehicle's current location. From there, we might pick up radio communications. Ethan considered the risks. Moving during daylight increased their chances of detection, but the intelligence value potentially justified the exposure. Marina stays with the equipment. Doc, you and Carlos maintain overwatch from here. I'll make the approach solo. Doc frowned. Standard protocol is two-person minimum for forward reconnaissance. Standard protocol is for standard situations, Ethan countered. One person moves faster, presents a smaller profile. Less chance of detection. Before they could argue further, Marina's surveillance equipment picked up a new signal. Vehicle approaching from the north. Fast. Single occupant. She adjusted the thermal imager. Heat signature suggests law enforcement engine pattern. Within minutes, a border patrol vehicle came into view, moving rapidly along the main access road that intersected with the canyon system. The SUVs immediately changed course, diverting into a narrow side canyon that provided concealment from the main route. Not a coincidence, Ethan observed. They knew exactly where to go to avoid contact. The Border Patrol vehicle continued along its path, the agent inside apparently unaware of the cartel presence less than half a kilometer away. Once it passed, the SUVs emerged from hiding and resumed their journey, now moving with greater urgency. They have someone on the inside, Carlos said quietly. Someone feeding them patrol schedules or providing real-time updates. The realization added a new dimension to their challenge. If cartel operations had infiltrated local law enforcement, whether Border Patrol, County Sheriff's Department, or state police, their own intelligence gathering became considerably more dangerous. Any official reports they filed might go directly to cartel-affiliated eyes. We keep this contained, Ethan decided. No reports through official channels until we identify which agencies are compromised. They tracked the vehicles until they departed the canyon system, heading southwest toward the border. As darkness fell, they relocated their observation post to a new position overlooking the drainage basin where the SUVs had temporarily hidden from the Border Patrol vehicle. Under the cover of night, Ethan and Carlos approached the location while Doc and Marina maintained overwatch. The drainage basin showed clear signs of repeated use. Discarded water bottles, cigarette butts, boot prints from multiple individuals. They photographed everything, collecting select items for later analysis. Fresh oil stains, Carlos pointed out, indicating dark spots on the rocky ground. These vehicles come through here regularly. Ethan examined the surrounding terrain with his night vision equipment. The basin was a natural concealment position with multiple exit points. An ideal temporary hiding spot for vehicles evading detection. Someone with extensive knowledge of the terrain had selected this location. Someone like Victor Salazar, with his military background and tactical training. They completed their reconnaissance and returned to the observation post shortly after midnight. Marina had intercepted fragments of radio communications, mostly in Spanish, using what appeared to be a simple code system for locations and movements. They're planning something for tomorrow night, she reported, playing back a recorded transmission. References to special package and high-value delivery. Time frame approximately 2,200 hours. Location? Ethan asked. Marina indicated a point on their map where several canyon systems converged. Based on the coordinates they referenced here. About 12 kilometers southeast of our current position. That's Sherman's Notch, Carlos said. Recognition in his voice. Natural bottleneck. Only one way in, one way out. Treacherous terrain on all sides. Perfect for a secure exchange, Ethan noted. Defensible, controlled access, clear lines of sight for overwatch positions. He studied the topographical features. Also a perfect ambush location if someone wanted to hit them. The implication hung in the air. They gathered significant intelligence already, enough to justify contacting federal authorities like the DEA or FBI rather than potentially compromised local agencies. But a direct observation of a major cartel transaction would provide actionable evidence of a kind rarely obtained. We need eyes on that exchange, Ethan finally said. Full documentation. Then we take everything to the FBI field office in Tucson. Let them handle the interdiction. The decision made, they spent the remainder of the night planning their approach to Sherman's Notch. The terrain presented significant challenges: minimal cover on the approaches, few viable observation positions with sufficient line of sight, natural acoustic properties that could amplify sounds and give away their presence. "There's a ridgeline here," Carlos indicated, tracing a line on the map. "Difficult climb, but it provides a commanding view of the entire notch. We'd have to approach from the eastern side, maintain absolute noise discipline. Distance to target would be approximately 800 meters, Doc calculated. Within range of our observation equipment, but challenging for clear audio capture." Marina considered the problems. "I could deploy remote acoustic sensors closer to the exchange point. Small enough to remain undetected, powerful enough to capture conversations within a 20-meter radius." The plan took shape. Approach under cover of darkness the following evening. Establish an observation post on the ridgeline overlooking Sherman's Notch. Deploy remote sensors near the expected exchange location. Document everything. Then extract without detection. Simple in concept, dangerously complex in execution. "We'll need a secure extraction plan," Ethan added, all too aware of how quickly surveillance operations could deteriorate if discovered, "and a contingency if we're compromised." They worked through the details methodically, drawing on their combined military experience and local knowledge. By dawn, they had a comprehensive plan with primary and alternate approaches, emergency extraction routes, and communication protocols for various scenarios. As they prepared to rest before the evening operation, a coded message arrived from Miguel: "Eagle flying noon tomorrow. Standard patrol route modified. New eyes watching." The Border Patrol agent was warning them that a specialized surveillance aircraft would be operating in the region, likely with thermal imaging capabilities that could detect their presence. The second part of the message suggested someone new was monitoring Border Patrol communications, implying further evidence of cartel infiltration. "We need to warn Miguel to be careful," Doc said. "If they've got someone inside Border Patrol monitoring communications." No direct contact, Ethan decided reluctantly. Too risky for him. "We proceed as planned, but with additional counter-surveillance measures." They rotated sleep schedules throughout the day, maintaining minimal activity to avoid detection from aerial surveillance. By late afternoon, they had repacked their essential equipment, leaving the observation post configured to appear abandoned if discovered. As they prepared for departure, Marina received an encrypted data packet from one of her remote monitoring systems, a trail camera placed near the canyon entrance 3 days earlier. The images showed a convoy of 3 vehicles passing through just after dawn: 2 pickup trucks and an armored SUV typical of high-level cartel operations. Center vehicle rear passenger, she enhanced the image, focusing on a partially visible face. Possible match for Salazar. The grainy image showed a man with close-cropped hair and sunglasses, his posture conveying the alert readiness Ethan recognized from combat veterans. Though not conclusive, the facial structure and bearing matched the intelligence photos of Victor Salazar they'd reviewed. "He's personally overseeing this operation," Ethan noted. "Whatever's happening tonight, it's significant." They departed their position at dusk, moving in 2 separate teams to minimize visual signature. Ethan and Carlos took the more difficult eastern approach to the ridgeline, while Doc and Marina circled around to establish a secondary observation post with the communications equipment. The desert night closed around them as they navigated the challenging terrain. Carlos led the way, his intimate knowledge of the landscape proving invaluable as they traversed narrow game trails and dry washes invisible to less experienced eyes. They moved without lights, relying on moonlight and night vision equipment, maintaining complete silence through hand signals and prearranged communication protocols. 3 hours of careful movement brought them to the base of the ridgeline overlooking Sherman's Notch. The ascent would be the most dangerous part of their approach, exposed, with loose rock that could create noise or start small slides if disturbed. They began the climb with painstaking precision, testing each handhold and foothold before committing their weight. Halfway up, Carlos froze, signaling for absolute stillness. Ethan complied instantly, years of operational discipline overriding even the instinct to ask why. For nearly 2 minutes, They remained motionless on the rock face before Carlos finally indicated they could proceed. Overwatch position on the western rim, he whispered when they had ascended another 50 meters. Single sentry. Arm. The cartel had established security earlier than expected, already preparing the location for the exchange. This complicated their approach significantly. They would be forced to maintain an observation position farther from the target area than planned, with potential sentries between them and their extraction route. They adjusted their route, angling farther east before ascending to the ridgeline. The detour added another hour to their approach, but they finally reached a position offering a clear view of Sherman's Notch while remaining outside the likely patrol pattern of cartel sentries. Ethan established communication with Doc and Marina, who had reached their secondary position without incident. Romeo position established. Limited visibility of target area. Confirm at least one sentry on western rim. Proceed with remote deployment if possible. Marina's voice came back, barely audible even through their encrypted communication system. Secondary position secure. Initiating remote deployment in 5 minutes. Multiple heat signatures detected in the notch. Count at least 8 personnel already on site. Carlos set up their observation equipment while Ethan maintained security, scanning their surroundings continuously for any sign of detection or approaching threat. The ridgeline position provided excellent visibility but left them vulnerable if discovered, limited cover, difficult extraction routes, potential to be pinned down by superior numbers. Through their high-powered optics, they observed the notch below. Cartel personnel had established a perimeter with sentries at each approach, while the main force prepared the exchange site, setting up portable lights powered by small generators, establishing communication equipment, positioning vehicles for quick departure if necessary. The operation showed clear military influence in its methodical preparation and security consciousness. "These aren't street thugs," Carlos whispered. "Look at those patrol patterns. Overlapping fields of fire. Staggered rotations." Ethan noted the same details. Salazar's influence. "He's bringing battlefield tactics to cartel operations." Marina's voice came through their earpieces, remote sensors deployed and active. 3 along the southern approach, 2 at the exchange site itself. Audio feed established. For the next hour, they monitored the cartel's preparations, documenting personnel, equipment, and tactical positions. By 2,100 hours, an hour before the scheduled exchange, the notch contained 12 cartel operatives with a security perimeter that would make any conventional law enforcement approach nearly impossible without triggering an immediate firefight. Southern approach, multiple vehicles, Marina reported suddenly. Approaching slowly, lights off. Heat signatures indicate 3 vehicles, approximately 8 personnel. The new arrivals entered the notch with practiced caution, the lead vehicle stopping to allow security personnel to approach on foot before the convoy proceeded to the exchange site. Through their observation equipment, Ethan and Carlos documented the entire process, the careful security checks, the positioning of additional sentries, the emergence of what appeared to be the leadership from the central vehicle. "Visual confirmation on Salazar," Carlos murmured, focusing the camera. "Center vehicle, black tactical gear." Ethan observed through the spotting scope as Victor Salazar emerged from the SUV. Even at this distance, his commanding presence was evident, the way the other cartel members deferred to him, the confident way he assessed the security perimeter, the precise hand signals he used to direct personnel. This was a man accustomed to command, to combat operations, to high-stakes situations. The audio feed from Marina's remote sensors captured fragments of conversation. "Shipment arrives in 20 minutes. Special handling required. High-value asset. Direct orders from the top." Another vehicle approached from the northern entrance to the notch, a single SUV with American plates, moving with less tactical discipline than the cartel vehicles. It stopped approximately 50 meters from the cartel convoy, waiting as Salazar and 2 bodyguards approached on foot. From their elevated position, Ethan and Carlos photographed the encounter, though the distance made detailed facial recognition of the new arrival difficult. The man who emerged from the American SUV wore civilian clothes but carried himself with a bearing that suggested law enforcement or military background. "What's a white guy in a government vehicle doing meeting with Salazar's crew at 10 p.m. in the middle of nowhere?" Carlos whispered. The answer became clear as Marina's remote audio sensors captured portions of the conversation. Patrol schedules as requested. GPS coordinates for new surveillance posts, 48-hour window guaranteed. He's selling Border Patrol intelligence, Ethan realized, the implications immediately clear. Patrol routes, surveillance positions, operational timeframes. They continued documenting the exchange as the American handed over what appeared to be a laptop or tablet device to Salazar, receiving in return a package that disappeared quickly into his vehicle. The entire transaction took less than 5 minutes before the American departed, leaving Salazar and his team still in position. "We need to identify that guy," Carlos said, reviewing the photographs they'd captured. "If he's Border Patrol, priority remains the primary exchange," Ethan reminded him. That was just the preliminary meeting. They didn't have to wait long. At precisely 2,200 hours, a new set of vehicles approached from the southern entrance, 2 large cargo vans flanked by pickup trucks with armed personnel in the beds. Unlike the previous arrivals, these vehicles moved with less tactical precision, suggesting different leadership or purpose. The convoy stopped in the center of the notch, where Salazar waited with his security team. From their observation position, Ethan and Carlos documented as the rear doors of the lead van opened, revealing not drugs as they had expected, but people, at least a dozen individuals who emerged under armed guard. "Human trafficking," Carlos whispered, his voice tight with controlled anger. But something about the scene didn't match typical human smuggling operations. The people weren't dressed like migrants crossing the border. Their clothing suggested Middle Eastern origin, and they moved with a disciplined cohesion that caught Ethan's trained eye immediately. "Those aren't regular migrants," he observed. "Look at how they move, how they position themselves. Those are trained personnel." The audio feed confirmed his suspicion as fragments of conversation in Arabic came through, quickly followed by Salazar's voice in accented English. "Your passage to the training facility is arranged. 3 months of preparation before deployment. Targets already selected." Carlos looked at Ethan, the implication clear in his expression. "Terrorists?" "Salazar is smuggling terrorists across the border." "Worse," Ethan replied grimly. "He's providing them with operational support, training facilities, target intelligence." The full scope of what they were witnessing became clear, not just criminal activity, but a national security threat of the highest order. They continued documenting the exchange as Salazar personally inspected what appeared to be identification documents for each of the Middle Eastern men. The entire process showed a level of professionalism and security consciousness far beyond typical cartel operations. "This goes way beyond drug smuggling," Carlos said quietly. "This is..." His words cut off as a sharp crack echoed through the notch, not gunfire, but the sound of Carlos's boot dislodging a small rock that clattered down the ridge face. A small sound, but in the desert night, it carried with unnatural clarity. Below, Salazar's head snapped up, his hand immediately moving to his sidearm as he barked orders to his security team. Flashlight beams began sweeping the ridgelines as armed men moved toward predetermined defensive positions. "We're compromised," Ethan said, already packing their observation equipment. "Extraction Plan Alpha. Move now. Move in 3-second intervals. Different directions, then converge at the extraction point." Ethan whispered, muscle memory from countless similar situations taking over. "I'll create a diversion on my third move. Carlos, you head northeast. Go." They separated instantly, each darting to cover before freezing in place as flashlight beams swept past their former position. Below, Salazar was organizing his men with military precision, establishing a search pattern that would systematically clear the ridgelines. Ethan counted silently. 3 seconds. Move. He slid 10 feet to his left behind an outcropping of rock. freezing as a beam of light passed just meters away. 3 more seconds. Another movement, this time angling down the ridge toward a drainage gully that might provide cover for a longer distance. On his third move, Ethan reached into his pack and extracted a small device Marina had provided, a tactical distraction unit developed for special operations. He activated it, tossed it 30 meters to the west, then immediately moved in the opposite direction. 15 seconds later, a series of bright flashes and sharp reports erupted from the western ridge, not loud enough to be mistaken for genuine gunfire, but sufficient to draw attention and disrupt the search pattern. Cartel gunmen immediately redirected their focus, several firing rounds toward the distraction. Ethan used the momentary chaos to make significant progress down the eastern face of the ridge, moving as quickly as the treacherous terrain allowed. The desert night vision goggles gave him advantage over the cartel's more conventional equipment, allowing him to navigate without betraying his position with a flashlight. 5 minutes of careful movement brought him to the predetermined rendezvous point, a dry wash that offered concealment for their exfiltration route. Carlos was already there, his breathing controlled despite the rapid descent. "Doc and Marina?" Ethan whispered, scanning behind them for pursuers. "Already moving to the secondary extraction point," Carlos confirmed. They had more warning, less attention. They moved swiftly through the wash, using its natural depression to shield them from observation. Above, they could hear vehicles starting, the cartel mobilizing to widen their search perimeter. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Ethan's mind flashed back to a night operation in Afghanistan's Karangal Valley, a reconnaissance mission compromised when a goat herder stumbled upon their position. That night had ended with a desperate 18-kilometer movement under pursuit, 2 team members wounded, extraction by helicopter under fire. The memory sharpened his focus, old training asserting itself. They'll establish roadblocks on all the main approaches, he predicted, analyzing Salazar's likely response. Vehicle checkpoints, roving patrols. "We need to go deeper into the desert than they'll expect. Circle around their containment effort." Carlos nodded, already plotting their route. "There's an old Apache trail system through these canyons. Not on any maps. My grandfather showed me years ago. Difficult terrain, but it'll get us clear of their search radius." For the next 2 hours, they pushed themselves through punishing desert terrain, scaling rock faces, traversing narrow ledges, wading through occasional pockets of quicksand-like silt deposits that could trap the unwary. All while maintaining noise and light discipline, aware that cartel search teams were expanding outward from Sherman's Notch. Several times they froze in place as vehicles passed nearby, headlights sweeping across canyon walls. Once, they pressed themselves into a crevice as a search team passed less than 50 meters away, the voices of cartel gunmen carrying clearly in the night air. Dawn was approaching when they finally reached the emergency rendezvous point, an abandoned mining cabin tucked into a box canyon 10 kilometers from Sherman's Notch. Doc's vehicle was already there, concealed under a camouflage tarp, but there was no sign of their teammates. "They should have beaten us here," Carlos said, concern evident in his voice. Ethan checked his satellite phone. No messages, no missed calls. The emergency communications protocol they'd established remained in use. Could be taking an alternate route. Could be laying low until full daylight. They established a defensive perimeter around the cabin, each taking observation positions that provided coverage of the likely approach routes. The desert sunrise painted the landscape in hues of amber and crimson, revealing terrain features hidden by the night. In daylight, the vastness of the desert made their escape seem more plausible, too much ground for even Salazar's well-organized force to cover comprehensively. At 0732, Ethan's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message, a series of coordinates followed by package secure, delayed by patrols. ETA 0830. "They're okay," he told Carlos. "Had to detour around search teams. They'll be here in about an hour." The relief was momentary. They still faced a critical decision: what to do with the intelligence they'd gathered. Evidence of a corrupt official selling Border Patrol information. Documentation of what appeared to be terrorist operatives being shepherded across the border by Salazar's cartel organization. Information that represented both an immediate public safety threat and a complex political liability. "We need to get this to federal authorities," Carlos said, reviewing the photographs they'd captured. "FBI, Homeland Security, someone above the potential corruption at the local level." Ethan nodded slowly, but years of operational experience had taught him to consider all angles. "Salazar knows he was observed. He knows we have documentation of the exchange. He'll accelerate his timetable, move the operatives quickly, eliminate evidence. More reason to get this to the authorities immediately." "Agreed. But we need to be smart about it. Direct approach to the FBI field office in Tucson puts us on official radar, statements, documentation chain, bureaucratic delays. By the time they mobilize a response team, Salazar's operatives could be anywhere in the country." Carlos studied him. "You're thinking about intercepting them ourselves." It wasn't a question. They'd served in enough operations together for Carlos to read Ethan's tactical assessments. And he wasn't wrong. Part of Ethan was already calculating probabilities, analyzing routes, considering options for a direct intervention. "We're 4 people against an unknown number of hostiles with superior firepower and local support networks," Ethan said, deliberately focusing on the practical limitations. "Not to mention operating outside any legal authority. But with superior training, better knowledge of the terrain, and the element of surprise," Carlos countered. "Plus the right thing to do." Those weren't tourists Salazar was bringing in. The arrival of Doc and Marina at 0815 temporarily postponed the decision. They emerged from the desert looking trail-worn but uninjured, Marina's equipment bags slung over Doc's broader shoulders to distribute the weight more efficiently during their extended movement. Cartel search patterns were sophisticated, Marina reported as they secured the equipment inside the cabin. Coordinated movement, communication discipline, effective use of terrain features for maximum coverage. These aren't street thugs with guns. They're operating like a military unit. Salazar's influence, Ethan confirmed. He's bringing his special forces background to cartel operations. They shared their respective observations, consolidating the intelligence gathered. Marina had maintained remote access to her surveillance sensors until the cartel discovered and disabled them, providing additional audio recordings of conversations at the exchange site. The intelligence painted a disturbing picture. A scheduled transport of the Middle Eastern operatives to a training facility somewhere in northern Arizona, mention of target packages and deployment timelines that suggested an attack in planning stages. "This goes beyond drugs and border politics," Doc said soberly, stating what they all recognized. "This is a national security threat, which means we need to get this intelligence to the appropriate authorities immediately," Marina added. "FBI Counterterrorism Division would be my recommendation. I have a contact at the Tucson field office, someone I trust." Ethan weighed the options. His military training emphasized clear chains of command, proper protocols, working within established systems. But his combat experience had also taught him that sometimes direct action was necessary when systems moved too slowly or were compromised from within. The memory of Victor Salazar's confident precision in directing the operation tipped the balance. This was a professional adversary who would anticipate conventional responses and prepare accordingly. By the time federal authorities assembled a task force, secured warrants, and mobilized resources, the immediate threat would have vanished into the vastness of the American interior. "We move on parallel tracks," he decided. "Marina, contact your FBI connection discreetly. Initial approach through unofficial channels. No official statements until we confirm the information is reaching the right people." She nodded, already extracting her secure satellite phone. "The rest of us need to track Salazar's movement of those operatives," Ethan continued. "Based on the conversations we intercepted, they're headed to a training facility in northern Arizona. We need to identify potential locations, establish surveillance, maintain pressure until federal resources can take over." "That's still operating outside proper channels," Doc noted. though his tone carried no judgment. "We're not engaging directly," Ethan clarified. "Intelligence gathering only. Surveillance and tracking. Nothing that crosses the line into vigilante territory." The rationalization sounded hollow even to his own ears, but the alternative, doing nothing while a clear threat developed, was unacceptable. His years in special operations had instilled a deep sense of responsibility that transcended bureaucratic boundaries when lives were at stake. "I'm in," Carlos said simply. Doc nodded his agreement. "Someone needs to keep you from getting yourselves killed anyway." Marina rejoined them after making her call. "My contact will meet us this evening in Tucson. Unofficial capacity, but she's senior enough to escalate quickly if the intelligence warrants it." "Good." Ethan turned to their map of the region. "Now we need to identify potential locations for this training facility mentioned in the exchange." They spent the next hour analyzing geographical and infrastructural constraints. The facility would need to be remote enough to avoid casual discovery but accessible by road. It would require certain basic amenities: water, electricity, structures suitable for housing and training activities. Most importantly, it would need to be defensible and offer privacy from aerial observation. Carlos identified several potential sites: abandoned ranches, former mining operations, remote hunting lodges. They narrowed the list based on proximity to Salazar's established smuggling routes and accessibility from Sherman's Notch. "This location fits all the criteria," Carlos eventually said, indicating a point on the map approximately 180 kilometers north of their current position. Former militia compound abandoned after a federal raid in 2019. Remote location, defensible terrain, existing structures including underground components. Off-grid power system, well for water. Ideal for their purposes. Owned by whom currently? Ethan asked. County seized it after the raid. Supposed to be auctioned off, but the process stalled in legal challenges. Officially vacant, minimal monitoring by local authorities. The location made tactical sense. Isolated yet accessible by a network of service roads. Natural defensive features including elevated positions for sentries. Distance from population centers that would minimize chances of accidental discovery. We need to confirm, Ethan decided. Aerial reconnaissance would be ideal, but we don't have those resources. Next best option is to establish an observation post near enough to monitor vehicle movements, but outside their likely security perimeter. The plan took shape quickly: relocate to a position near the suspected training facility, establish surveillance, document activities, and compile evidence for federal authorities. Simple in concept, potentially dangerous in execution, particularly if Salazar's men were operating with the same tactical awareness they demonstrated at Sherman's Notch. As they prepared to move out, Ethan experienced a moment of clarity that transported him back to his military service. The familiar rhythm of operational planning, the focused energy of a team united by purpose, the certainty that came with clear objectives, these elements had been missing from his civilian security work, where profit margins and client satisfaction often took precedence over meaningful impact. This was different. This mattered in ways his consulting work never had. Whatever Salazar was planning with those operatives represented a threat to innocent people, the very threat Ethan had spent his military career fighting against in distant lands. Now it had followed him home, emerged in his own backyard, threatened his own community. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of combat deployments, he'd sought peace in the Arizona desert, only to find himself drawn back into conflict. Perhaps this was inevitable. The skills he'd developed, the training he'd received, the instincts he'd honed were always going to make him a lightning rod for these situations. Some men were built for calm waters, others were crafted for storms. They departed the mining cabin at 1,130 hours, taking separate vehicles and routes as a precaution against interdiction. Marina would continue to Tucson for the FBI meeting, while Ethan, Doc, and Carlos would establish initial surveillance at the suspected training facility. They would reconvene the following morning to consolidate their intelligence and determine next steps. Ethan rode with Carlos in his modified Jeep, their equipment secured in concealed compartments built specifically for hunting expeditions in remote terrain. As they traveled north on seldom-used back roads, Ethan's mind drifted to a mission in northern Afghanistan, a multi-day surveillance operation targeting a suspected Taliban training camp in a remote valley. The parallels were unsettling. Different terrain, different adversaries, but the same essential challenge: identifying and neutralizing a threat before it could mature into action. "You've got that look," Carlos commented after a long silence. "What look?" "The one you'd get before an operation, when you were gaming out all the ways it could go wrong." Ethan smiled faintly, just remembering similar situations. Different context. Afghanistan. Karangal Valley. 2011. Surveillance operation that went sideways when our position was compromised. Had to exfil through 20 clicks of hostile territory with minimal support. Carlos nodded, understanding the relevance. "How'd that one end?" "2 wounded. 1 critically. Helicopter extraction under fire. Mission partially successful. We identified the target location but didn't get all the intelligence we needed." "And the lessons learned?" This was an old exercise between them, extracting applicable insights from past operations to improve current planning. It had served them well in combat, this ability to learn and adapt from experience rather than repeating mistakes. Over-reliance on technical surveillance when human intelligence would have provided better warning about enemy patrol patterns, Ethan recited from memory. Insufficient contingency planning for compromise scenarios. Inadequate distribution of medical supplies among team members. All relevant to our current situation, Carlos noted. All addressed in our planning, Ethan countered, though the reminder was welcome. Military operations had structures, resources, and support systems that their current unofficial activity lacked. They would need to be more careful, more adaptable, more precise in their execution. As they approached the general vicinity of the suspected training facility, they diverted onto increasingly primitive roads, eventually transitioning to off-road travel along dry washes and game trails that Carlos navigated with the confidence of intimate familiarity. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a ridgeline approximately 3 kilometers from the compound, offering a clear view while remaining outside likely patrol perimeters. Doc joined them 30 minutes later, approaching from a different direction as planned. Together, they established a rudimentary observation post concealed within a natural rock formation, setting up surveillance equipment that would allow them to monitor activity at the compound without exposing their position. The former militia compound sat in a natural depression surrounded by low hills, a defensive position that would funnel any approach through easily monitored channels. Even from this distance, Ethan could see signs of recent activity. Tire tracks on the access road, smoke from what appeared to be a cooking fire, and the occasional glint of reflection from metal or glass suggesting movement of personnel. "Definitely occupied," Doc confirmed, studying the location through a spotting scope. "I count 3 vehicles in the main yard. Movement patterns consistent with security patrols. Professional spacing and positioning." Carlos focused his attention on the perimeter. Sentries at regular intervals. Approximately 300-meter spacing. Suggests they have the manpower for a complete security rotation. Minimum 12 personnel, just for perimeter security. Plus the operatives we observed at Sherman's Notch, Ethan added. Plus Salazar's command element. We're looking at 2,530 hostiles minimum. The numbers were concerning. Even with their superior training and experience, they were severely outnumbered and outgunned. This reinforced Ethan's decision to focus solely on intelligence gathering rather than direct intervention, observation only, documentation of evidence, preparation for handing off to federal authorities with appropriate resources for interdiction. As the afternoon progressed into evening, they established a surveillance rotation, each taking 2-hour shifts to maintain continuous monitoring while allowing for rest. The compound showed signs of a well-organized operation, regular patrol rotations, disciplined light and noise discipline after sunset, and efficient movement patterns that suggested military training. Shortly after midnight, Their patience was rewarded when a convoy of vehicles approached the compound from the south, two cargo vans flanked by pickup trucks identical to those they'd observed at Sherman's Notch. The gate opened immediately, suggesting expected arrival, and the vehicles proceeded directly to a central building where figures emerged to unload what appeared to be equipment cases and personal gear. Same vehicles from the exchange, Carlos confirmed, photographing the arrival sequence. Timing matches the projected movement schedule we overheard. Doc focused the high-powered optics on the individuals emerging from the vans. Visual confirmation on several of the subjects from Sherman's Notch. Middle Eastern males, same clothing, same movement patterns. Ethan studied the operation through night vision equipment, noting the precision with which Salazar's men secured the perimeter during the arrival, positioning themselves to cover all potential approach vectors. Nothing was left to chance, no gaps in security, no moments of vulnerability. Whoever had trained these men had instilled professional discipline and tactical awareness that rivaled military special operations units. Salazar's running this like a military deployment, he observed. Clear chain of command, defined roles, contingency planning. This isn't typical cartel behavior, which makes them more dangerous, Doc noted, and raises bigger questions about their objectives. The arrival procedure completed in less than 20 minutes, with all personnel and equipment moved inside the main structure. Perimeter security resumed normal patterns, though with noticeably higher alertness than before the convoy's arrival. At 0200 hours, Marina's secure message arrived. Meeting complete. Contact receptive. Evidence in appropriate hands. Request full team meeting to discuss developments. Location Gamma, 1000 tomorrow. Good news, Doc commented after Ethan shared the message. Means we're not in this alone anymore. Depends on how quickly the FBI can mobilize, Carlos said. Bureaucracy moves slowly. Approvals, warrants, resource allocation. Could be days before they're ready to move on this location. Which is why we maintain surveillance, Ethan decided. Document everything. Movement patterns, personnel rotations, training activities. Build the most complete intelligence picture possible to expedite federal response when it comes. They maintained their observation through the remainder of the night, documenting a pre-dawn patrol change and what appeared to be preparation for morning training activities. As sunrise illuminated the compound, their suspicions were confirmed. The Middle Eastern operatives emerged for physical training, moving through exercise routines with military precision while Salazar's men maintained security positions. They're not just smuggling these guys across the border, Carlos observed grimly. They're actively training them. For what? The question hung unanswered as they continued their documentation. By mid-morning, they had compiled extensive evidence of what was clearly a paramilitary training operation, weapons familiarization exercises, small unit tactics practice, communication drills. Nothing about the activities suggested simple criminal enterprise. This was systematic preparation for coordinated action. At 0830, they began their extraction, carefully withdrawing from their observation position, using terrain features for concealment. The return journey proceeded without incident, though they maintained heightened vigilance against potential discovery. By 0945, they arrived at location Gamma, a roadside diner 50 kilometers south of the compound, selected for its public setting and multiple exit routes. Marina was already there, seated in a corner booth with line of sight to both the entrance and the emergency exit. She wore different clothing than the previous day and had altered her appearance slightly with a baseball cap and sunglasses, small changes that would defeat casual recognition without appearing deliberately disguised. Your FBI contact was receptive? Ethan asked after they ordered coffee, the mundane transaction providing cover for their conversation. More than receptive, Marina confirmed. Catherine Reyes, Senior Special Agent, Counterterrorism Division. She reviewed our evidence immediately, confirmed the identities of 3 of the Middle Eastern subjects from terror watch lists, known associates of al-Qaeda splinter groups. The confirmation validated their concerns, but raised the stakes considerably. This wasn't speculative anymore. The threat was real, identified, and developing rapidly less than 200 miles from where they sat. Timeline for response. Ethan asked the critical question. Marina's expression tightened. That's where things get complicated. She's pushing for immediate task force assembly, but facing procedural hurdles. The corruption element, that Border Patrol official selling information, triggered additional protocols. Internal affairs involvement, compartmented information flows, restricted notification. Bureaucratic delays, Carlos translated. Essentially, she estimates 72 hours minimum before they can mount an operation with sufficient resources to secure the compound. 3 days. Given what they'd observed of the training regimen, 3 days represented significant preparation time for whatever Salazar's operatives were planning. 3 days might be the difference between interdiction and catastrophe. We've confirmed the facility location, Ethan informed her. Documented arrival of the operatives, ongoing training activities, security patterns. The intelligence picture is solid. Marina nodded, absorbing the information. I'll relay the confirmation to Agent Reyes. It strengthens their case for expedited authorization, but doesn't guarantee faster action, Doc noted. No, she admitted. The wheels of federal law enforcement grind at their own pace, especially with complex jurisdictional questions. They reviewed options over a breakfast none of them had appetite to finish. The responsible course was clear: continue intelligence gathering, maintain surveillance on the compound, document activities, and prepare comprehensive briefing materials for federal authorities. Stay within legal boundaries. Operate as concerned citizens providing information rather than vigilantes taking direct action. Yet each of them recognized the potential consequences of delay. Whatever Operation Salazar was facilitating had progressed beyond the planning stage into active preparation. People with confirmed terrorist connections were receiving specialized training on American soil. The threat was immediate, evolving, and potentially catastrophic if allowed to mature unchecked. We continue surveillance in rotating teams, Ethan finally decided. 2-person shifts, 12 hours on, 12 off. Maximum documentation, minimum exposure. We feed everything directly to your FBI contact, Marina. Push for accelerated response timelines. The plan was practical, responsible, and left a sour taste in his mouth. In Afghanistan, his team wouldn't have hesitated to act directly against an identified threat of this magnitude. But this wasn't a combat zone operating under military rules of engagement. This was American soil, with American laws and procedures that, however imperfect or slow, represented the system they had all sworn to defend. As they finalized logistics for the continued surveillance operation, Ethan's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message, not from any of their team, but from Miguel's secure line. Asset compromised. Repeat, asset compromised. Subjects aware of surveillance. Accelerating timetable. Immediate action advised. The cryptic warning carried clear meaning. The corrupt Border Patrol official had somehow learned of their observation at Sherman's Notch, identified their surveillance of the compound, or both. The information had been passed to Salazar, who was now adjusting his operational timeline in response. Ethan shared the message with the team, its implications immediately apparent to all. If they're accelerating their timetable, Carlos began. Then waiting for federal response may mean waiting until it's too late. Doc finished the thought. Marina's expression hardened. I'll contact Agent Reyes immediately. This changes the risk assessment. While she stepped outside to make the call, Ethan found himself back in familiar territory, the tactical calculation of risk versus necessity, the moral weight of action versus inaction, the responsibility of capability. He had spent years developing the skills to identify and neutralize precisely this kind of threat. So had each member of his makeshift team. They had the training, the experience, and now the intelligence to act. But they lacked the authority, the resources, and the legal sanction that had accompanied their military operations. Acting directly meant crossing a line, becoming the very vigilantes they had explicitly decided not to be. Marina returned 5 minutes later, her expression grim. Agent Reyes is pushing emergency protocols, but the process has inherent delays. 24 hours minimum before they can deploy a tactical team, even with the accelerated threat assessment. That's not good enough, Carlos said quietly. It's all we have through official channels, she countered, though without conviction. The silent understanding passed between them. Official channels might not be sufficient in this situation. The gap between identified threat and authorized response might need to be filled by those with the capability to act, regardless of formal sanction. If we were to, Doc began carefully, continue more aggressive intelligence gathering, what would be our most critical information gaps? The phrasing was deliberate, maintaining the fiction of mere surveillance while opening the door to more direct action. They all recognized the shift, acknowledged it without explicit statement. Communications, Ethan said, accepting the implicit direction. We know the what and where, but not the when and which targets. We need to get inside their operational planning, understand the timeline and objectives. Which means closer surveillance, Carlos added. Possibly signal interception if they're using radio communications for training. Perimeter penetration, Marina translated, abandoning pretense. We need to breach their security cordon, establish close target reconnaissance, potentially access their command center. The mission parameters took shape. A reconnaissance operation to gather critical intelligence on Salazar's operational timeline and targets, conducted without official sanction, but with the ultimate goal of providing actionable intelligence to federal authorities. Not direct intervention against the threat, but not passive observation either. A middle ground born of necessity and capability. If, and I stress if, we were to conduct such an operation, Ethan said carefully, we would need to establish clear rules of engagement. Non-lethal approaches only. Avoid detection rather than engage if compromised. Primary objective remains intelligence gathering, not interdiction. The others nodded their agreement. None of them had come to this lightly, and all recognized the legal and ethical boundaries they were proposing to cross. Yet each had also sworn oaths to protect their country against threats both foreign and domestic, oaths that transcended specific roles or authorizations in times of clear and present danger. I'll coordinate with Agent Reyes, Marina said. Keep her informed of developments without specifying methods. Maintain the channel for handoff when federal resources are ready to deploy. Carlos and I will conduct detailed planning for the reconnaissance operation, Ethan added. Approach vectors, timing, equipment requirements. Doc, you'd be our overwatch and emergency response if things go sideways. As they departed the diner and headed back toward their vehicles, Ethan felt the familiar weight of command settling onto his shoulders, the responsibility for lives and mission success that had defined his military career. This wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq, with clear chains of command and established protocols. This was uncharted territory, a mission defined by necessity rather than authority. Yet the core principles remained unchanged. Protect the innocent, neutralize the threat, complete the mission. The desert terrain might be familiar, but the moral landscape was shifting beneath his feet, boundaries blurring between civilian and operator, between legal and necessary, between observer and participant. As he climbed into Carlos's Jeep for the drive back to their staging area, Ethan found himself recalling his grandfather's words about the desert. It reveals truth. Perhaps that was happening now, the comfortable fictions of his civilian life falling away to reveal the warrior that still lived beneath the surface, called forth by necessity and threat just as it had been in distant combat zones. The compound lay 30 kilometers to the north, its occupants unaware of the decision just made. For now. Soon, Ethan and his team would breach that bubble of security, penetrate the perimeter, and seek the intelligence needed to prevent whatever attack Salazar and his terrorist associates were planning. The trap they had set for the cartel at Sherman's Notch had failed. Now they would take the fight directly to the enemy's stronghold, transforming the desert into a battlefield once more. Dusk cast long shadows across the desert landscape, as Ethan and Carlos made their final preparations. They had spent the afternoon meticulously planning their approach to the compound, studying satellite imagery, establishing extraction routes, and preparing equipment. Now, as darkness began to claim the terrain, the time for action had arrived. "Comms check," Ethan said, adjusting the encrypted tactical radio Marina had provided. The system operated on frequencies unlikely to be monitored by cartel forces, with compression algorithms that would render any intercepted transmissions unintelligible without specialized decryption equipment. Lima 1, check. Doc responded from his overwatch position on a ridgeline 1.5 kilometers northwest of the compound. He had established a concealed observation post with clear sightlines to both the target and their planned approach vector. Lima 2, check. Marina confirmed from her position in the mobile command center. A modified SUV parked 8 kilometers south, equipped with signal interception equipment and secure communications links to their FBI contact. Lima 3, check. Carlos finished, completing the circuit. Each of them carried minimal equipment for the operation. Nothing that would definitively identify them if captured, nothing that couldn't be explained away as the gear of experienced desert hikers if questioned by legitimate authorities. Their weapons were limited to sidearms for defensive purposes only, their faces obscured by standard dust masks that would hinder facial recognition without appearing overtly tactical. Ethan performed a final check of his night vision equipment, then surveyed the terrain ahead. Their intelligence gathering over the previous day had identified a drainage culvert on the eastern perimeter of the compound that appeared to receive minimal attention during security patrols. The approach would be challenging 800 meters of exposed ground before reaching the cover of a dry wash that would lead them to the culvert. But they had timed their movement to coincide with the darkest period of the night, when the security rotation showed a consistent 7-minute gap in coverage of that sector. "Time check," Ethan said. 2,127 hours, Marina confirmed. "You have 18 minutes until the patrol gap. Weather conditions holding stable. No thermal anomalies detected on approach vector." "Copy that." Moving to phase line Alpha, Ethan and Carlos began their advance, using natural terrain features for concealment as they covered the first 300 meters in careful, measured movements. Each step was placed deliberately, avoiding loose rocks or dry vegetation that might create noise. Despite years in civilian life, the muscle memory of tactical movement remained ingrained in both men. The careful weight distribution that minimized sound, the measured breathing that maintained oxygen levels without audible gasping, the disciplined spacing that would prevent a single detection from compromising both operators. As they reached phase line Alpha, a shallow depression that offered their last significant cover before the most exposed portion of their approach, Ethan signaled a momentary halt. They lay motionless, allowing their senses to acclimate fully to the environment, listening for any indication that their movement had been detected. The desert night surrounded them with its paradoxical combination of stillness and subtle activity, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of small nocturnal creatures through scrub vegetation, the whisper of a light breeze across sand, but nothing to suggest human awareness of their presence. Lima 1 goes to actual. Doc's voice came through the earpiece. "All clear from Overwatch. Scheduled patrol has passed eastern perimeter. Timing window opens in approximately 7 minutes. Copy that," Ethan responded. Proceeding to phase line Bravo, they resumed their advance, now moving across the most exposed section of their approach, a stretch of relatively flat terrain with minimal natural cover. Here, they relied primarily on darkness and their earth-toned clothing to avoid detection, moving in short bursts between sparse vegetation, freezing in place when vehicles moved within the compound perimeter. 5 minutes of careful progression brought them to phase line Bravo, the edge of the dry wash that would conceal their final approach to the drainage culvert. As they slid down into the natural depression, Ethan felt the familiar surge of focused adrenaline that had accompanied countless similar infiltrations during his military career. Not the panicked rush of fear, but the controlled alertness of the professional operator, senses heightened, awareness expanded, reactions primed. Ghost actual to Lima 1. Ethan whispered. In position at phase line Bravo. Status on patrol timing. Lima 1 confirms timing window opens in 90 seconds. Eastern perimeter currently clear. They used the brief window to check their equipment one final time. The mission objective remained strictly intelligence gathering. Access the compound perimeter, place remote surveillance devices provided by Marina, and if possible, obtain direct audio or visual confirmation of operational plans. No direct engagement with hostile forces, no sabotage of equipment or facilities, nothing that would alert Salazar to their presence. Get in, gather intelligence, get out. Window opening now, Doc advised. You have approximately 7 minutes until next patrol reaches your sector. Moving, Ethan confirmed, and they proceeded down the wash toward the culvert entrance. The drainage system had been installed decades earlier when the compound served as a legitimate ranch operation, designed to channel flash flood waters safely around the structures. Years of disuse had partially filled it with silt and debris, but it remained passable, a narrow tunnel approximately 1 meter in diameter that passed directly under the perimeter fence, emerging near a storage building on the eastern edge of the compound. Ethan reached the culvert first, using his tactical light at minimum intensity to confirm it was clear of obstacles or wildlife before entering. The tight space required them to move on hands and knees, progressing slowly to minimize noise as decades of accumulated dust and debris crunched beneath them. 40 meters of uncomfortable crawling brought them to the interior opening, partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. Ethan paused at the exit, using a small fiber optic camera to survey the immediate area before exposing their position. The feed showed the expected layout, the storage building 10 meters to their left, the main structure 30 meters ahead, and no personnel visible in the immediate vicinity. Lima 2, confirm Eastern Quadrant status, he whispered. Thermal imaging shows no personnel within 50 meters of your position, Marina confirmed. 2 heat signatures moving north-south along western perimeter. 1 stationary signature at main entrance. Copy that. Proceeding to Objective Alpha. They emerged from the culvert, staying low as they moved quickly toward their first objective, the storage building that satellite imagery suggested might house communications equipment based on the presence of a small antenna array on its roof. If they could access this building, they could potentially place a remote monitoring device on the communication systems, providing ongoing intelligence even after they withdrew. The short distance to the building felt impossibly exposed, despite the darkness and their careful movement. By the time they reached the structure's shadow, Ethan's combat-trained senses were at maximum alertness, processing every sound, movement, and environmental change with hyper-focused attention. The building's door was secured with a simple padlock, a security measure easily defeated with the specialized tools Carlos carried. Within 30 seconds, they had gained access to the interior space, closing the door behind them before risking illumination with their tactical lights. The space contained what they had hoped to find: communication equipment including radio systems, computer terminals, and what appeared to be a satellite uplink. Marina had prepared them for this possibility, providing miniature data interception devices that could be attached to such systems, capturing transmissions without affecting normal operations. Jackpot, Carlos whispered, already moving to install the devices according to Marina's detailed instructions. Command and control setup. Professional grade. Ethan stood guard by the door, monitoring for any approach while Carlos worked. The intelligence value of this discovery exceeded their expectations. Direct access to Salazar's communications infrastructure would provide ongoing insight into operational planning, personnel movements, and potentially specific targeting information. Lima 1 to Ghost Actual. Doc's voice came through with controlled urgency. Vehicle approaching East Gate. Patrol returning ahead of schedule. Recommend immediate exfil. The warning accelerated their timeline. Carlos finished installing the final device, and they prepared to withdraw to the drainage culvert. But as they moved toward the door, the sound of voices outside froze them in place. Cartel personnel approaching, their conversation in Spanish clearly audible through the thin walls. "And the American wants confirmation by morning," one voice said. "Says the schedule has been moved up. Primary and secondary targets need to be hit simultaneously." "Salazar won't like the change," a second voice responded. "Planning called for 72 hours between operations. Tell that to your contacts in Washington. They're the ones pushing the accelerated timeline." The footsteps passed without approaching the storage building, but the brief conversation contained critical intelligence, confirmation of planned operations against multiple targets, an accelerated timeline, and most disturbing, reference to contacts in Washington. The corruption extended beyond local border patrol officials to someone with federal influence. When the voices faded, Ethan made a rapid tactical decision. Change of plan. "We need to access the main building. Confirm target information." The adjustment increased their risk profile significantly, but potentially offered intelligence that could save countless lives if these operations involved terrorist attacks as they suspected. Carlos nodded his agreement without hesitation, his expression reflecting the same calculation, increased personal risk justified by the stakes involved. "Lima 2, be advised we are proceeding to Objective Bravo," Ethan informed Marina. "Need real-time updates on all personnel movements." "Copy that," she responded, tension evident in her voice. "Be advised thermal imaging shows approximately 14 personnel distributed throughout the compound. 2 in North Tower, 3 in Central Courtyard, remainder inside main structure." "Acknowledged. Moving now." They exited the storage building during a brief gap between perimeter patrols, using shadows and structural features for concealment as they approached the main building. Unlike the storage facility, this structure would certainly contain personnel, requiring even greater stealth to avoid detection. Satellite imagery had identified a potential access point, a second-floor window on the eastern face that appeared to lead to a minimally used portion of the building. Adjacent construction scaffolding, apparently part of ongoing renovations, provided a potential climbing route that would avoid ground-level security measures. They reached the base of the scaffolding without incident, but as they prepared to ascend, the compound's atmosphere suddenly changed. Lights activated in a tactical sequence, illuminating the perimeter while leaving the central areas in contrasting darkness, a security measure designed to blind potential intruders while preserving defenders' night vision. "Lima 1 to Ghost Actual," Doc's urgent voice came through. "Multiple personnel mobilizing. Vehicle starting. This looks like a departure prep, not a security response." Before Ethan could respond, Marina's voice added confirmation, Lima 2 confirming. "Radio traffic indicates imminent movement of multiple vehicles. They're accelerating their timeline. Right now." The development forced another rapid tactical reassessment. Their presence remained undetected. This wasn't a response to their infiltration, but a planned operation commencing earlier than expected. If they withdrew now, they would miss critical intelligence about destinations and objectives. If they remained, they risked being caught in the middle of a major mobilization with diminished extraction options. "We hold position," Ethan decided. "Observe the departure, document personnel and vehicles, then extract once they've cleared the compound." Carlos nodded agreement, and they concealed themselves beneath the scaffolding, using its structural elements and shadow patterns to avoid detection as activity in the compound intensified. Within minutes, personnel began emerging from the main building, moving with purpose rather than alarm, confirming this was a planned operation rather than a response to their presence. The Middle Eastern operatives they had observed at Sherman's Notch appeared, now dressed in nondescript Western clothing and carrying what appeared to be standard luggage. They were divided into 3 groups, each accompanied by cartel personnel who provided security and direction. The scene resembled a military deployment, organized, disciplined, efficient. A familiar figure emerged from the main building. Victor Salazar, dressed in tactical clothing, and conferring with what appeared to be team leaders from each group. Even from this distance, Ethan could recognize the commanding presence and professional bearing that distinguished Salazar from typical cartel lieutenants. This wasn't a criminal dispatcher sending drug mules on routine runs. This was a military commander deploying operational elements. Lima 2, are you capturing this? Ethan whispered. Affirmative, Marina confirmed. Full video documentation through your body cams. Agent Reyes receiving live feed. The operatives and their cartel escorts loaded into separate vehicles, 3 nondescript SUVs with civilian appearances that would attract minimal attention on American highways. Salazar provided what appeared to be final instructions to each vehicle's occupants before they departed through the main gate at carefully spaced intervals. Ghost actual to all Lima elements, Ethan said as the 3rd vehicle departed. Confirmed departure of 3 operational teams. Appears to be final phase of deployment. Salazar remains on-site with reduced security element. The departure of the operational teams created an unexpected opportunity. The compound's security posture had diminished significantly, with personnel focused on the deployment rather than perimeter integrity. If they could access the main building now, they might obtain critical intelligence about the targets before the operatives reached them. Adjusting mission parameters, Ethan decided. We're going to access the command center. Clock is running on those deployed teams. Lima 1 confirms reduced security profile. Doc supported the decision. Approximately 40% of personnel have departed. Patrols have not resumed standard pattern. They moved quickly to the scaffolding, ascending with practiced efficiency to the 2nd floor access point. The window was secured but not alarmed, a vulnerability Carlos exploited within moments, allowing them silent entry into what appeared to be a storage room under renovation. Inside the main building, they moved with extreme caution, using their knowledge of standard building layouts to navigate toward what would likely be the command center. The sounds of continued activity elsewhere in the structure provided both cover for their movement and indication of areas to avoid. A floor plan mounted on a wall for construction purposes provided invaluable guidance, identifying a command office on the central corridor of the main floor. They proceeded toward it, using standard close quarters movement techniques to minimize exposure as they descended an internal staircase and approached the target room. The door to the command office stood partially open, light spilling into the corridor. Voices from within confirmed occupancy, but the conversation suggested only 2 individuals remained, discussing logistics for the operations already underway. Ethan assessed their options rapidly. Direct confrontation carried extreme risk, but potential intelligence reward. Continued passive surveillance might yield information but wouldn't provide immediate actionable intelligence on the deployed operatives already moving toward their targets. The decision was made for them when one of the voices inside announced, "I'm going to check on the remaining preparations. Monitor the communications. Team 2 should be reporting in at Checkpoint Alpha within 20 minutes." Footsteps approached the door, forcing Ethan and Carlos to retreat quickly into an adjacent room, a small bathroom that offered temporary concealment. The cartel member passed without noticing their presence, his footsteps receding down the corridor toward the building's rear exit. Single occupant remaining in target room, Ethan whispered to Carlos. "We take him quickly, quietly. Primary objective is the operational plans, target locations." Carlos nodded, readying a zip tie restraint. They moved with synchronized precision born of countless joint operations, approaching the door from optimal angles to minimize reaction time for the occupant. In one fluid motion, they entered the room, Carlos securing the door behind them while Ethan approached the lone cartel member seated at a communications console. The man barely had time to register surprise before Ethan had him in a control hold, a forearm across his throat applying precise pressure to the carotid arteries. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to render him unconscious within seconds. "Clear," Ethan confirmed as the man went limp. Carlos secured him with zip ties and a gag, then positioned him out of sight beneath the desk while Ethan turned his attention to the materials spread across the command table. What they found exceeded their most optimistic intelligence expectations, detailed operational plans including maps, timetables, and photographs of 3 distinct targets. Ethan's blood ran cold as he recognized the locations: a major shopping mall in Phoenix, a courthouse in Tucson, and a border patrol station near Nogales. The attack was planned for the following day, multiple simultaneous strikes against civilian and government targets designed for maximum casualties and psychological impact. Lima 2, jackpot, Ethan transmitted, photographing the documents with his specialized equipment. Confirmed attack plans for 3 separate targets. Tomorrow, multiple casualty scenarios. Transmitting to Agent Reyes now, Marina confirmed. She's mobilizing tactical response teams to all 3 locations. Carlos had accessed the computer system, downloading files to a secure drive while Ethan continued documenting the physical materials. The intelligence treasure trove included not just operational details but personnel information on the operatives, communication protocols, and most valuable of all, a list of contacts within various U.S. agencies providing support to Salazar's operation. Ghost Actual to Lima 1, Ethan called as they finished securing the intelligence. We have what we need. Preparing to extract. Status on perimeter security? Remains diminished, Doc confirmed. Clear path to your original entry point. But be advised, vehicle returning through main gate. Appears to be Salazar. The complication accelerated their timeline. They completed their documentation, leaving the room exactly as they had found it aside from the still unconscious cartel members secured beneath the desk. Discovery was inevitable, but if they moved quickly enough, they could be clear of the compound before the alarm was raised. They retraced their path through the building, using the same careful movement techniques that had allowed their undetected entry. As they approached their exit point on the 2nd floor, the sound of the returning vehicle pulling up outside the main entrance added urgency to their extraction. Salazar's presence would likely mean increased security awareness and reduced time before their intrusion was discovered. They exited through the same window, descending the scaffolding with controlled haste. As they reached the ground, the compound's main door opened, voices carrying clearly in the night air as Salazar issued instructions to his remaining personnel. 1 hourly reports from all 3 teams. The moment they're in position, we initiate final countdown. No more delays. Ethan and Carlos moved quickly toward the drainage culvert, using the shadows of outbuildings for concealment. They had nearly reached their exit point when the compound erupted with activity, shouts of alarm, lights activating, the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. "They found our guy," Carlos whispered, increasing his pace toward the culvert. Lima 1 to Ghost Actual, Doc's voice carried controlled urgency. Full security alert in progress. All personnel mobilizing. Multiple foot patrols converging on eastern perimeter. You need to move. Now. They reached the culvert entrance just as flashlight beams began sweeping the compound grounds. Without hesitation, they entered the drainage system, moving as quickly as the confined space allowed while maintaining noise discipline. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, orders being shouted, vehicle starting, the methodical progression of a professional security force implementing containment protocols. Lima 2 to Ghost Actual, Marina's voice provided critical updates as they progressed through the drainage system. Thermal imaging shows pursuit elements approximately 60 meters behind your position. They've identified your exit point. The information confirmed what they already suspected: their escape route was compromised. Once they emerged from the culvert's exterior opening, they would be exposed during the critical first 100 meters of their extraction path. Lima 1, we need a diversion, Ethan transmitted as they approached the exit. Something to draw attention away from the eastern perimeter. Working on it, Doc responded tersely. They reached the culvert's exterior opening, pausing to assess the situation before exposing their position. Through the narrow aperture, they could see flashlight beams already searching the area outside the perimeter fence, cartel gunmen establishing a containment perimeter around their expected emergence point. Diversion initiating in 3, 2, 1. Doc's voice counted down, followed immediately by a series of bright flashes and sharp reports from the compound's western perimeter, the tactical distraction devices they had brought as contingency measures, now deployed to draw attention and resources away from their position. The effect was immediate. Shouts of alarm redirected attention, vehicles and foot patrols reorienting toward the perceived threat on the opposite side of the compound. The momentary reduction in coverage of their position created a narrow window of opportunity. "Now," Ethan said, and they exited the culvert at maximum speed, immediately angling away from the most obvious escape route, using terrain features for concealment as they put distance between themselves and the compromised perimeter. The desert darkness became their ally as they executed their emergency extraction route, a challenging path through broken terrain that would be difficult to follow even for experienced trackers. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit continued but grew more disorganized as the cartel forces struggled to determine their direction of travel. Lima 1 to Ghost Actual. Doc updated as they progressed. Pursuit elements splitting into search teams. 3 vehicles dispatched on access roads, likely attempting to establish blocking positions. Copy that, Ethan acknowledged. Proceeding to alternate extraction point Charlie. They maintained their pace through difficult terrain, drawing on their extensive training in desert movement. The route took them through a series of narrow canyons and dry washes specifically selected to defeat vehicle pursuit and complicate foot tracking. The physical demands were intense, climbing near vertical rock faces, traversing unstable scree fields, pushing through dense patches of cactus and scrub that tore at clothing and skin. An hour of punishing movement brought them to Extraction Point Charlie, a concealed position where Doc waited with the emergency vehicle, a modified off-road buggy designed for rapid movement through desert terrain. As they approached the rendezvous, Ethan felt the familiar mixture of physical exhaustion and heightened awareness that accompanied successful extractions from hostile territory. "Package secure," Doc confirmed as they loaded into the vehicle. Marina reports successful transmission of all intelligence to federal authorities. Response teams mobilizing to all 3 targets. The vehicle moved swiftly through terrain inaccessible to standard vehicles, putting rapid distance between them and the compound as the cartel's search pattern expanded outward. By the time they reached the secondary rendezvous point where Marina waited with their primary transportation, they had effectively broken contact with any pursuit. Agent Reyes confirms receipt of all intelligence, Marina reported as they transferred to the more conventional vehicles that would allow them to blend with civilian traffic. FBI tactical teams already deploying to Phoenix and Tucson. Border patrol stations being reinforced. They're implementing a full counterterrorism response. The immediate threat was being addressed through official channels, their intelligence allowing federal authorities to position assets to intercept the attack teams before they could reach their targets. But Salazar himself remained active, potentially capable of redirecting operations or activating contingency plans. What about Salazar? Carlos asked the question they were all considering. Agent Reyes has a tactical team en route to the compound, Marina confirmed. ETA approximately 90 minutes. The timing created a potential vulnerability. With the compound's security already alerted, Salazar would likely be implementing evacuation protocols, destroying evidence, and possibly executing contingency operations. By the time federal authorities arrived, he might be long gone, taking with him the broader network connections that had facilitated the plot. "We need to delay his departure," Ethan decided. "Disrupt his evacuation long enough for the FBI team to reach the compound." "How?" Doc asked. "We're clear of the area, and based on standard protocols, he's already burning documents and packing essential equipment." Ethan considered their options, drawing on his knowledge of similar operations. He'll maintain communications with the deployed teams until the last possible moment. Standard command protocol. If we could disrupt those communications. The relay station, Carlos realized. Satellite imagery showed a communications relay on that ridgeline north of the compound. Take that out, he loses contact with his operational teams. The target made tactical sense, a legitimate military objective that would disrupt command and control without direct confrontation with personnel. A precision strike against infrastructure rather than individuals, designed to delay rather than permanently disable. I can access their communications network through the devices we planted, Marina added. Create additional confusion with false transmissions, contradictory orders. The plan took shape quickly. Carlos would approach the relay station alone, using his exceptional skills in desert movement to avoid detection. A precisely placed explosive charge would disable the equipment without creating a catastrophic detonation that might harm personnel. Meanwhile, Marina would exploit their electronic access to disrupt coordination between Salazar and his deployed teams. This is still just to slow him down, Ethan emphasized. Delay his departure until federal authorities arrive. No direct engagement. Carlos nodded his understanding, already preparing the minimal equipment needed for the operation. As a former ranger with specialized training in sabotage operations, he was ideally suited for the mission. Capable of approaching the target undetected, placing charges with precision, and extracting without compromising the team. Lima 2 to all elements. Marina interrupted their planning, urgency in her voice. New communications intercepted. Salazar is initiating countdown procedures for all 3 operational teams. Timeline accelerated to 2 hours from now. The information changed their assessment dramatically. The federal response teams were mobilizing but might not reach all 3 targets in time to prevent the attacks, particularly if they were operating on incorrect timing information. The accelerated schedule suggested Salazar was adapting to the security breach, implementing contingency plans that might circumvent the planned interdiction. We need to disrupt him now, Ethan decided. By time for the federal teams to get in position. The decision crystallized their mission parameters from delay to active disruption. A more aggressive approach, but still focused on infrastructure rather than direct confrontation, creating sufficient chaos and communication breakdown to prevent Salazar from effectively coordinating the accelerated attacks. I'll handle the relay station, Carlos confirmed, checking his equipment one final time. 20 minutes to target, 5 minutes on objective, 20 minutes to extraction point. I'll coordinate with Agent Reyes, Marina added. Ensure the federal response adjusts to the accelerated timeline. The team separated, each moving to their assigned tasks with the practiced efficiency of experienced operators. As Carlos departed toward the relay station, Ethan maintained communication discipline, monitoring all channels while positioning himself to observe the compound from maximum distance. Through high-powered optics, he could see the activity had intensified, vehicles being loaded, personnel moving with increased urgency, lights illuminating the entire compound rather than maintaining tactical darkness. Signs of imminent departure, of an operation entering its final phase before components scattered to avoid capture. Lima 3 in position. Carlos reported approximately 18 minutes later. Visual on relay station. Minimal security, single guard, standard patrol pattern. Proceeding with approach. Ethan monitored the transmission, aware of the critical nature of this phase. If Carlos was discovered, it would not only compromise the mission but potentially accelerate Salazar's timeline further, perhaps triggering immediate execution of the attacks as a contingency measure. The minutes passed with excruciating slowness as Carlos made his final approach. In the compound below, Ethan observed multiple vehicles now staged near the main entrance, loaded with equipment and personnel, evacuation preparations in their final stages. Charges placed, Carlos finally reported. Initiating 30-second timer. Extracting now. Half a minute later, a brief flash illuminated the northern ridgeline, followed by the distant crump of a precisely calculated detonation. Through his optics, Ethan watched as the compound reacted to the sudden loss of communications, personnel stopping mid-ask, Salazar emerging from the main building to assess the situation, security teams redeploying toward the disabled relay station. Lima 2 to Ghost Actual. Marina confirmed what they were observing. Communications disrupted, intercepting multiple attempts to re-establish contact with operational teams. They're shifting to backup systems, but experiencing significant delays. The confusion created the window they needed, precious minutes during which Salazar's careful coordination was broken, his control over the deployed teams temporarily severed. In that gap, federal authorities would be moving into position at all three targets, prepared to intercept the attack teams before they could execute their mission. Agent Reyes confirms FBI tactical teams in position at Phoenix and Tucson targets. Marina updated. Border Patrol reinforcements at Nogales. Helicopter assets en route to compound. ETA 15 minutes. The pieces were falling into place. With communications disrupted and federal response teams positioned at all three targets, the immediate threat was being contained. The sabotage operation had achieved its objective, creating sufficient delay for official channels to mobilize an effective response. Lima 3 clear of objective, Carlos reported, his controlled breathing suggesting he was moving rapidly back toward their position. No pursuit detected. As they monitored the situation, Ethan observed a new development at the compound, Salazar and a small security detail loading into a single vehicle, separating from the main evacuation group. A commander extracting independently from his forces, possibly to establish a new command post from which to attempt re-establishing control. Salazar is moving, Ethan reported. Single vehicle, northern access road, minimal escort. Agent Reyes needs that vehicle intercepted. Marina responded immediately. He's the key to the entire network. If he escapes now. The implication was clear. If Salazar evaded capture during this operation, he would simply relocate, reconnect with his network of corrupt officials and terrorist contacts, and resume operations elsewhere. The threat would remain active, perhaps even intensify after this setback. Ethan found himself at another decision point, the critical balance between proper authority and necessary action. Federal forces were still minutes away. Salazar was mobile now, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain to evade the coming dragnet. Without immediate intervention, he would disappear into the vast desert landscape, perhaps crossing back into Mexico before official pursuit could be organized. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath as Ethan weighed options and consequences. In the distance, the faint thrum of approaching helicopters suggested federal authorities were closing in, but perhaps not quickly enough to contain all elements of the threat they had uncovered. Ghost Actual to all Lima elements, Ethan finally transmitted, his decision made. We have one final objective. The desert night seemed to pulse with anticipation as Ethan made his decision. Overhead, the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, federal authorities closing in, but not quickly enough to intercept Salazar before he disappeared into the vast wilderness. I need the fastest route to intercept that vehicle, Ethan said, already moving toward their modified off-road buggy. Marina, coordinate with Agent Reyes. Make sure those helicopters know we're friendlies operating in the area. Copy that, Marina responded, her fingers flying across her communications equipment. Sending our transponder codes now. Agent Reyes confirmed she'll relay to incoming assets. Doc moved to the driver's position of the buggy, already plotting the intercept course on their tactical GPS. Northern access road forks 3 kilometers ahead. Eastern branch leads back toward Highway 77, western branch deeper into BLM land. Based on his profile, he'll take western, more escape options, less chance of roadblocks. Agreed, Ethan confirmed, checking his equipment one final time. If we cut across this Arroyo system, we can intercept before he reaches the fork. Gets us ahead of him rather than chasing from behind. Carlos, who had just returned from the relay station operation, immediately grasped the plan. Pincer movement. I'll maintain position here with Marina as backup. If he doubles back, we'll be waiting. The coordination happened with practiced efficiency. Each team member understanding their role without lengthy explanation, the product of their shared military background and the trust built over years of operations together. Within minutes, Doc and Ethan were racing across the desert in the modified buggy, its specialized suspension absorbing the punishing terrain as they cut a direct line toward the intercept point. Ethan's mind flashed back to similar operations in Afghanistan. High-value target interdictions where success or failure often hinged on precise timing and terrain knowledge. The methodology remained identical even though the desert landscape had changed from Central Asian mountains to American Southwest. Identify likely escape routes, position assets to control key terrain features, force the target into a manageable decision point. Lima 2 to Ghost Actual. Marina's voice updated through their comms. Target vehicle maintaining course on Northern Access Road. Speed approximately 40 kilometers per hour due to terrain. Your intercept timing looks good if you maintain current pace. Copy that, Ethan acknowledged, bracing himself as the buggy crested a ridge and briefly went airborne before landing hard on the opposite slope. Aerial asset status? 2 FBI helicopters, ETA now 7 minutes to compound. They've been advised of our operation and will provide support once on station. The information confirmed they were operating in the narrow window between Salazar's escape and the arrival of official forces, precisely the gap their unofficial action was designed to fill. Not vigilante justice, but the bridge between identified threat and authorized response. Visual on target road, Doc announced as they approached a ridgeline overlooking the dirt track Salazar would be traveling. No vehicle yet. Perfect timing for the intercept. They positioned the buggy in a concealed location and moved quickly to establish a blocking position, not a direct confrontation, but a controlled channeling of Salazar's movement options. Ethan deployed a specialized device across the road, a rapid inflation barrier designed to force vehicles to stop without causing catastrophic crashes. Developed for military checkpoints, it would give Salazar 2 options: surrender or divert onto a secondary track that would lead directly toward the approaching federal helicopters. Ghost Actual in position, Ethan confirmed. Barrier deployed. Ready for intercept. The wait was brief. Within minutes, the distinctive sound of an approaching vehicle reached them, an SUV moving at careful speed along the rough dirt road, headlights illuminating the path ahead. Through his night vision equipment, Ethan confirmed the vehicle matched Salazar's departure from the compound. Target approaching intercept point, he transmitted. Stand by. The SUV rounded a bend in the road, headlights sweeping across the terrain until they illuminated the barrier now fully deployed across the path. The driver reacted immediately, brakes engaging, vehicle slowing rapidly, then stopping approximately 30 meters from the obstruction. For a moment, nothing happened. The vehicle idled in place, its occupants likely assessing the situation, calculating options. Then the driver's side door opened, and Victor Salazar emerged, his posture alert but controlled as he surveyed the apparent roadblock. Even from this distance, Ethan could recognize the tactical assessment taking place. Salazar checking sight lines, identifying potential threat positions, evaluating alternate routes. The behavior of a trained operator, not a panicked criminal. He directed his security detail with hand signals, positioning them to provide coverage as he himself moved toward a vantage point for better assessment. He's good, Doc observed quietly, moving exactly how we would. The observation carried no admiration, merely professional recognition of a capable adversary. Salazar had been special forces before turning his skills to criminal enterprise. The professional foundation remained visible in every movement, every decision. Lima 2 to Ghost Actual. Marina's voice came through with controlled urgency. Aerial assets now 5 minutes out. Multiple vehicles departing compound, heading in your direction. Likely security reinforcements. The information compressed their timeline. Soon the situation would escalate beyond their capacity to manage as a 4-person team. They needed to contain Salazar now, before additional forces arrived or the federal helicopters created complications with their arrival. Taking initiative, Ethan decided, activating the loudspeaker they had mounted on the buggy. His voice carried clearly across the desert night, Victor Salazar. Federal authorities are inbound. Your operational teams have been intercepted. Stand down and await processing. The deception was calculated, implying official authority they didn't possess, suggesting greater force than was currently present, pressuring Salazar with the illusion of a collapsing strategic position. Standard psychological tactics for forcing surrender with minimal risk of violent confrontation. Salazar's response was immediate, but not what they had hoped. Rather than surrender, he directed his security detail to establish defensive positions while he himself retreated to the vehicle. Through night vision, Ethan observed him retrieving what appeared to be a satellite phone, likely attempting to re-establish communications with his deployed teams or request additional support. He's not buying it, Doc assessed, preparing for resistance. Lima 2, status on those reinforcements from the compound? Ethan requested. 3 minutes behind target vehicle. For minutes until aerial assets arrive. The situation was deteriorating toward potential armed confrontation, precisely the scenario they had sought to avoid throughout the operation. Their mission remained intelligence gathering and delay, not direct engagement with hostile forces. Yet Salazar's response was forcing their hand, creating conditions where further passive observation might allow a significant threat to escape. A decision crystallized in Ethan's mind, drawing on years of operational experience in managing similar high-risk scenarios. Direct confrontation carried unacceptable risk, but they could still shape Salazar's decision-making through controlled application of pressure. Doc, circle wide in the buggy, he directed. Create the impression of multiple vehicles, multiple personnel. I'll maintain overwatch from this position. Doc nodded understanding, quickly moving to the vehicle while Ethan established a covered position with clear lines of fire towards Salazar's location. Not to engage lethally, both men understood that boundary remained firm, but to maintain the option for precision fire if the situation required disabling vehicle engines or communication equipment. The buggy roared to life, lights activating as Doc navigated a wide arc that would create the impression of multiple vehicles approaching from different angles. The psychological effect was immediate, Salazar's security detail adjusting positions, dividing attention, creating gaps in their defensive perimeter. Lima 2, ready to initiate electronic countermeasures on my mark, Ethan transmitted. Target that satellite phone frequency. Standing by. Marina confirmed. Execute. The electronic warfare capabilities Marina had brought to the operation engaged, sophisticated jamming equipment targeting specific communication frequencies, severing Salazar's attempts to coordinate with his network. Combined with the already disabled relay station at the compound, the additional measure isolated him completely from his operational structure. Through his optics, Ethan could see Salazar's growing frustration as the satellite phone failed repeatedly, each attempt to establish communication met with electronic silence. The psychological pressure was building, surroundings that appeared to contain multiple approaching vehicles, communications equipment rendered useless, the distant but growing sound of helicopter rotors suggesting imminent arrival of overwhelming force. Lima 2 to Ghost Actual. Marina's voice carried notes of triumph. Agent Reyes confirms all 3 operational teams intercepted. Phoenix and Tucson targets secured without incident. Firefight at Nogales Border Station, 2 tangos down, remainder in custody. The information changed the equation fundamentally. The immediate threat that had justified their extraordinary measures was neutralized. Federal authorities had successfully interdicted all 3 attack teams before they could execute their missions. The operational necessity that had driven their independent action was resolving itself through official channels. Acknowledged, Ethan responded. Primary mission objective achieved. Switching to containment posture only. He activated the loudspeaker again, his voice projecting across the desert with calm authority. Victor Salazar. Your operation has failed. All 3 teams are in federal custody. Helicopter assets are 60 seconds out. This is your final opportunity to surrender without further incident. Whether it was the claim of captured teams, the approaching sound of helicopters, or the psychological pressure of apparent encirclement, something finally broke Salazar's resistance. Ethan observed him conferring briefly with his security detail, then making a decision that reflected his military background, a rational assessment of an untenable position, a strategic withdrawal rather than futile last stand. Salazar emerged from cover, hands raised to shoulder height in the universal gesture of surrender. His security detail followed his example, placing their weapons on the ground before assuming compliant positions. Ghost Actual to Lima 2, Ethan transmitted. Target is complying. Alert Agent Reyes that Salazar is in custody, awaiting official processing. Copy that, Marina confirmed. Agent Reyes acknowledges. FBI tactical team will take custody upon arrival. The helicopter appeared over the ridge moments later, powerful searchlight illuminating the scene below as it established a holding pattern. Within minutes, the distinctive vehicles of the FBI hostage rescue team arrived, the elite tactical unit deployed for high-risk federal operations. Ethan and Doc remained in overwatch positions until the federal agents had secured Salazar and his men. Only when the situation was fully under official control did they withdraw to their rendezvous point where Carlos and Marina waited. It's done, Ethan confirmed as they regrouped. Salazar in federal custody. All three attack teams intercepted. Threat neutralized. The simple statement belied the complexity of what they had accomplished, identifying a major terrorist plot, gathering critical intelligence, and delaying the principal organizer long enough for federal authorities to mobilize an effective response. All without official sanction, operating in the gray area between civilian status and their former military roles. Agent Reyes wants to meet, Marina informed them. Secure location, just us and her. No official statements yet. The meeting occurred 2 hours later at an isolated ranger station on Bureau of Land Management property, neutral ground where FBI Special Agent Catherine Reyes waited alone. An imposing woman in her late 40s with the focused intensity of a career federal investigator, she greeted them with professional respect rather than recrimination. You four prevented what would have been the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11, she stated without preamble. The intelligence you gathered allowed us to intercept all three operational teams before they reached their targets. Preliminary estimates suggest the combined attacks would have resulted in hundreds of casualties. She spread photographs across the table, evidence recovered from the captured operatives, details of the planned attacks, contingency measures that would have maximized casualties. The scope of the averted tragedy was sobering. I won't ask how you obtained this intelligence, she continued carefully. The official record will show an anonymous tip leading to escalating federal investigation. Your names won't appear in any documentation. Your involvement ends here. The arrangement was both professional courtesy and practical necessity, acknowledgement that their actions, while crucial to preventing catastrophe, had operated outside official channels and authority. A clean break that protected both the federal investigation and their own legal standing. What about Salazar's network? Ethan asked. The corrupt officials, the contact in Washington? Being pursued through appropriate channels, Agent Reyes assured them. The evidence you provided has already led to 3 arrests within Border Patrol. The Washington connection is under active investigation at the highest levels. This doesn't end with Salazar. The assurance satisfied their primary concern that the broader threat network would be dismantled rather than simply losing one operational leader. The corruption that had facilitated the plot would be excised, the vulnerabilities in the system addressed. As they departed the ranger station, the first light of dawn spreading across the desert horizon, Ethan felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and clarity that followed successful operations. The mission was complete. The threat neutralized. The system had worked, albeit with their unofficial assistance during the critical gap between identified threat and authorized response. What now? Carlos asked as they drove back toward civilization, the events of the night already seeming somewhat surreal in the growing daylight. We go back to our lives, Ethan answered simply. Do what we've always done. But even as he said it, he recognized something had fundamentally changed. The battle hadn't stayed in Afghanistan or Iraq. It had followed them home, emerged in their own backyard. The skills they had developed in foreign combat zones had proven necessary on American soil, protecting their own communities from threats once considered distant and abstract. The desert around them seemed different now, not just the peaceful retreat he had sought after military service, but contested ground requiring vigilance and, when necessary, direct action. The transformation wasn't in the landscape, but in his perception of it, in his understanding of his own continued role in its protection. As the sun rose fully above the eastern mountains, Ethan made a decision that felt less like change and more like recognition of what had always been true. The warrior hadn't disappeared when he'd removed his uniform. The mission hadn't ended when he'd returned to civilian life. Some battles continued, some responsibilities remained, some skills would always be needed. Actually, he amended, I think we establish a more formal arrangement. Professional security consulting with specialized focus on border region threats. Official channels, proper contracts, legitimate operations. The others nodded, understanding, recognizing this wasn't just about employment, but about purpose, about channeling their unique capabilities through appropriate structures while maintaining the effectiveness that had served them in crisis. Reyes would make a good contact for federal contracts, Marina suggested. And Miguel could connect us with legitimate border patrol operations, Carlos added. The framework took shape in Ethan's mind, a specialized security consulting operation focused on the unique challenges of the border region, staffed by veterans with relevant experience. Operating through official channels but maintaining the adaptability and expertise that conventional agencies sometimes lacked. Not vigilantes or mercenaries, but professionals filling a critical gap in the security ecosystem. As they reached the main highway, rejoining the flow of normal civilian traffic, Ethan felt the weight of the night's events settling into perspective. The desert had indeed revealed truth, as his grandfather had taught him. About the threats they faced, about the system's strengths and vulnerabilities, about their own continued role in protecting what mattered. The transformation was complete. Not a return to military service, but not a retreat from responsibility either. A new path forward that honored both his warrior training and his civilian identity, that respected proper authority while maintaining the capability to act when necessary. The desert stretched endlessly around them, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Much like the future they now faced, full of challenges but also purpose, requiring vigilance but offering clarity. Ethan embraced both realities as the car carried them back toward town, toward the next chapter of a mission that had never truly ended. 3 months after the operation that prevented a major terrorist attack, Ethan stood on the observation ridge behind his property, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of crimson and gold. The landscape remained unchanged, but everything else had transformed significantly. The headlines had been dramatic if incomplete: major terror plot foiled, cartel terrorist connection exposed, border security overhaul initiated. The official narrative credited anonymous tips and excellent intelligence work by federal agencies, with no mention of 4 veterans who had bridged the critical gap between identified threat and authorized response. Salazar now resided in a federal supermax facility awaiting trial on multiple terrorism charges. His operational network had been dismantled, his corrupt contacts in American agencies identified and prosecuted. The broader investigation had reached surprisingly high levels, resulting in resignations and indictments that continued to reverberate through Washington. But for Ethan and his team, the most significant change was professional rather than public. Border Defense Consultants, their newly established security firm, had quickly gained traction with contracts from both government agencies and private entities. Their specialized knowledge of the region, combined with their military background and demonstrated effectiveness, created immediate demand for their services. Agent Reyes had become a valuable ally, directing appropriate contracts their way while maintaining the careful fiction that their involvement in the Salazar operation had been minimal and entirely through official channels. Similar arrangements with Miguel and other legitimate Border Patrol agents created a working relationship that respected proper authorities while leveraging the team's unique capabilities. The sound of approaching vehicles drew Ethan's attention as his team arrived for their weekly strategy meeting. They had established headquarters in a converted ranch house 20 minutes from his property, professional facilities with secure communications, training areas, and administrative support. 6 new contract requests this week, Marina announced as they gathered around the conference table. 3 from Border Patrol for surveillance system design, 2 from private ranches experiencing increased cartel incursions, and 1 special consultation request from FBI counterterrorism for an upcoming operation. They reviewed each opportunity methodically, selecting those that matched their capabilities and ethical standards. No mercenary work, no extrajudicial operations, no assignments that undermined legitimate authority, but plenty of opportunities to apply their specialized skills within proper frameworks, filling gaps in the security ecosystem rather than operating outside it. The desert's harsh clarity had revealed a middle path, neither blind obedience to systems that sometimes moved too slowly nor vigilante action that disregarded proper authority. They had found the balance Ethan had always sought since leaving military service, a way to honor both the warrior's capabilities and the citizen's responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, Carlos raised his coffee cup in a subtle toast. To borders defended. To threats identified, Doc added. To gaps filled, Marina continued. To missions completed, Ethan finished, completing their informal ritual. The cartel's defeat was undeniable. Though some questioned the extent of Ethan's actions, most celebrated the powerful message sent. America does not bow to intimidation. Ethan, humble yet firm, quietly stepped back from the limelight, continuing duties without fanfare, steadfast in moral clarity. Their story stands as a testament to an enduring American truth, that genuine strength lies not in aggression but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.